In Blender, we have the option to move our objects around in space using what is called the transform gizmo. This may be called a manipulator or a widget. These names can be used interchangeably, so whatever you decide to call it, that's A-OK with me. We can find where to show or hide the gizmo here in the Gizmo drop-down menu. Down under Object Gizmos, you can find the Move, Rotate, and Scale gizmo, and we can turn them on and off by checking or unchecking the box next to them. You can also show or hide them by turning on the entire menu on or off. However, note this option will hide a lot of the other UI elements as well. Let's start with taking a look at the Move gizmo. As you can see, we are presented with three arrows pointing in the direction of the representative axes. Red being the x-axis, green being the y, and blue the z-axis. And if we left click and drag on these arrows, the cube will move in that direction. We can move the cube in all three axes relative to our view plane by clicking and dragging inside this little white circle here. Now say for instance we want to move the cube along the ground plane, the x and the y. We can click on the blue square here, and this will exclude the z-axes and move only along the x and y plane. We can do that with the red square to exclude the x-axes, and also on the green square to exclude the y-axes. When we turn on the rotation gizmo, we'll be presented with three rings representing and color-coded to their respective axes, just like the Move gizmo was. If we click and drag on one of these rings, the cube will follow by rotating on that axis. Clicking and dragging along the outside white ring will rotate along all three axes, relative to the viewing plane. Clicking and dragging within the inner sphere will activate a trackball mode, which can feel a bit goofy at first, but with practice can be a great tool for posing an object or armature. When we turn on the scale gizmo, we are presented with three lines that have cubes on the ends of each of them. At this point, you probably have an idea of what each of these handles do. The color-coded cubes, when click and dragged, scale in the direction of the representative axes, red for x, green for y, and blue for z. Like the Move gizmo, you can scale along two axes by clicking on the square representing the axes you want to exclude. Clicking in the white circle will scale evenly across all three axes. Now let's take a look at what happens when we turn all these gizmos on at one time. Notice we have all the main transforms available to us, but things like the buttons to exclude particular axes are not available. The outer white ring and the inner white sphere from the Rotate gizmo are available. Also, the inner white circle from the Move gizmo is available. If we take a look in our toolbar, which if hidden can be accessed by hitting T on the keyboard, we have a set of transform tools. There's a Move, Rotate, Scale, and Transform tool. This is exactly what we just went over. However, these tools will override any settings you might have in the Gizmo menu. Here we'll have all our gizmos turned on. Then we'll select the Move tool. See how only the Move gizmo is displayed now. So if you're running into issues where you're trying to access a gizmo with the menu options and it isn't showing up, double check that a Transform tool isn't overriding your access to it. Now whether you're using the Gizmo menu or the Transform tools, the way these are oriented and displayed is exactly the same. They will use the orientation set at the top of the viewport header here. Right now we are set to global. No matter which way the object is moved or rotated, the gizmo will stay aligned with the global coordinate system. If we set this to local, notice how the gizmo reorients to the object's local space. Normal is a bit easier to see when we go into edit mode of an object. You can see the manipulator aligns with the normal of the selected face, where the z-axis is pointing out from the face. There is gimbal, which will show how the computer actually calculates rotation in 3D space. It can get a bit complicated when talking about rotation order, and we'll save that for another course. Then we have the view orientation, which locks and aligns the X and Y plane to our view, which can get quite handy at times. In general, the main three you'll be using the most often will be global, local, and view. We can change the way the gizmos behave based on the pivot point that we have set from this Transform Pivot Point menu here. By default, it is set to the medium point, which, when we have multiple objects selected, will set the pivot point to the medium point of the selection. Individual will allow each object to rotate around their own original point and stay in their own position. Active element will rotate around whatever the active object or last selected object is. So if I select this cube, then the monkey head, you can see it will rotate about the monkey head's origin. If I select them in the opposite order, they will rotate about the cube. Finally, there's the 3D cursor. This can be placed anywhere in space, and any selected object will transform about it. See how I place the cursor here, and rotate our selection, how it now rotates around the cursor. A good thing to note though, any rotation that is applied to an object that is not around its own origin point will result in a translation and a rotation on that object. The gizmos are a great way to see and get used to the different orientations. In fact, as a beginner, you may want to work with these exclusively until you feel comfortable working with them. However, it's in my opinion that Blender's real strength is in its use of hotkeys, and I highly recommend that you eventually work towards working with and getting familiar with them. Throughout your animation journey, you're going to find what works best for you. You may find that you use a hybrid of gizmos for some things and hotkeys for others. It's completely up to you and what works best for your workflow. But in the meantime, let's go over some of those hotkeys. To translate or move an object, hit the G key to grab, and we can move the object as if we had clicked inside the small circle of the Move tool. If you want to constrain it along the x-axis, we can hit the X key. To constrain along the y-axis, we can hit Y. And to go up and down the z-axis, we hit Z. If we want to exclude an axis and move along the other two, we would hit G and hold Shift plus the axes we want to exclude. So if we hit Shift Z, we are moving the object around the ground XY plane. Shift X would exclude the x-axis and Shift Y would exclude the y-axis. To rotate our object, we can hit R, which will rotate the object relative to our view plane. Hitting R again will activate trackball mode and will orbit about its pivot point. To constrain the rotation to a specific axis, you can hit X, Y, or Z. We can scale the object with the S key. Hitting the X, Y, or Z key will scale along those axes. We can also exclude an axis and scale along the remaining two by holding Shift and pressing the axis you want to exclude. Shift X, Shift Y, and Shift Z. Whenever we lock an axis while transforming, the orientation will be based on what's selected above here. If it's set to anything other than global, hitting the hotkey to lock an axis a second time will change the orientation to global. If the orientation is set to global, hitting the hotkey to lock the axis twice will set the orientation to local. Clearing and resetting your transforms is really easy using the hotkeys. To reset your translation, hit Alt-G. To reset rotation, hit Alt-R. And to reset scale, hit Alt-S. Lastly, let's go over how to quickly change your orientation and pivot points using the hotkeys. You can change orientation using the comma key. This will bring up a pie menu where you can then select which orientation to switch to. Hitting period will bring up a similar pie menu with the pivot points available for selection. Sprinkling these hotkeys into your workflow with practice will set you on the right path to becoming a Blender master in no time.